Welcome back, Defenders. The world is kind of falling apart. Or at least the Russian world is falling apart. Syrian rebels take over Aleppo as Russia pledges to assist the Assad regime. I didn't have the fall of Aleppo on my 2024 bingo board, but it happens. Now, Aleppo in Syria is a city of about 2 million people. This is bigger than the city of Kharkiv. And the rebel forces in Syria just captured it from Assad's forces and the Russians. The Russians backed the official government, Assad. They controlled the city after taking it almost 9 years ago. And the city fell to the rebels within 3 days. With relatively little fighting, Assad's forces didn't want to fight. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert on all these various rebel factions in Syria. Some of them, I think, are worthy of our support from the West. But some of these rebel factions in Syria, they're not good guys. They're former ISIS fighters. They're terrorists. But these rebel groups have basically called a truce on each other, and they're all fighting Assad's forces right now. They're all banded together in order to finally remove the Assad regime and the Russians from Syria. Now let's do a refresher on Syria's geography because this is kind of an unusual country. To the east, they have Iraq. To the south, they have Jordan and Israel. To the west, they have Lebanon and the Mediterranean coast. But their longest shared border is with Turkey. The rebel forces are coming down from the north, from Turkey. Turkey is the one who is more or less providing support for these rebel forces to overthrow the Assad government. And I was kind of wondering, where's Erdogan been? Turkey and Erdogan has been pretty quiet this year, but Turkey won't support peace plan with territorial concessions, according to a Ukrainian lawmaker. And I think Erdogan sees weakness from the Russians. He sees weakness from the Kremlin, and he views this as his opportunity to get rid of Assad. This is a thorn in his side on his southern border. Instability in Syria means instability for Turkey. This is not good for Turkey, having millions of refugees staying in Turkey and crossing through Turkish territory to get to the EU. So Erdogan probably has been planning this for a while, and I didn't see it coming. I don't think many Western experts saw this coming. And the rebel forces are still moving. They're not just stopping at Aleppo. Their goal is to make it to Damascus. So the next stop after Aleppo is a town called Hama, and then they more or less have already taken this. 40 kilometers to the south, there's a city called Homs. And if the rebels take Homs, Assad and the Russians are screwed. Damascus is located down here. This is the capital city. Lebanon is to the west, blocking off the coastline. And the Russians, they have a naval base in Tartus, as well as an air base near Latakia. So the Russians can only resupply the Assad forces through this road going through Homs. So if the rebels can just take this transit route, Damascus is going to fall. Assad and his regime will not be able to be resupplied by the Russians. And then once you've taken Damascus, it would take a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, but I don't think the Russians will be able to stay in this naval base or this airfield if they have no control over the government or the forces on the ground to the east in Syria. This is very bad news for the Russians. If you're not on Telegram and you're not on social media sites posting all these pictures and videos, I'll put some links down below. These are pretty crazy. I can't play this because there's lots of gunfire in the air. They're celebrating, and there's music playing in the background. But here are the rebels in the city center of Aleppo doing donuts in Toyota pickup trucks, celebrating their victory. Here is a statue in Aleppo. This is Assad's older brother. And yeah, usually when a dictator falls, the first thing you do is you start taking down all the statues and monuments. Here is a picture of the rebel forces capturing a Russian Panzer S-1 anti-aircraft system. And this group photo is fascinating. You can just kind of look at their equipment and their gear and see how well equipped are these guys? Who the heck is funding them? And I guarantee you it's not the CIA. It's not the United States. We had nothing to do with this. This is all Turkey. Turkey's making their move. The rebel forces have captured planes and helicopters. I'll link the videos down below. They've captured lots of Russian armor. We've got BMPs and tanks, and all this equipment belongs to the rebels now. And here's a video I can share. The rebels got into Bashar al-Assad's palace in Aleppo, and if you want to see what the home of a dictator looks like, these rebel forces have their cameras out.
وهاي ضربة نوم للكلب. ضربة نوم خنزير. وهي الجاكوزي تبعه.
Okay, this residence is nice, but not as nice as, for example, Viktor Yanukovych's when, Ukraine had their Maidan revolution and was going through his palace. Now let's get the reaction of the Russians, because the Syrians are supposed to be their allies. The Syrians right now are supposed to be supporting the Russians in their fight against Ukraine. So here is a well-known Russian military blogger. How many of our guys died in Syria for liberation from terrorists? So now they can so freely surrender Aleppo. Judging by the footage, the rebels are huddled together, gathering in columns, and are not afraid of anything. I understand that our priority now is to strike Ukraine, but what is the problem with hitting these rebels gathering with something heavy so that they concern themselves going to Aleppo? Let's not forget that there are a lot of people there, and first of all, the terrorists will harm our people, including pro-Russian Syrians, and not only. We cannot lose control over where we sought justice. Where are the politicians looking? I don't understand. Here's another reaction from a Russian military blogger. Let's be honest, the situation in Syria is complicated by the behavior of the Syrians themselves. So the Russians are blaming the Syrians. It is absolutely true that the flower of the nation was lost in the first years of the war that began in 2011. But what was left was eaten up by corruption, nepotism, economic chaos, and an unwillingness to change anything. So there's a lot of finger pointing and blaming between the Russians and the Syrians right now. Who's actually responsible for losing the city of Aleppo? And it's obvious what is happening here. The Russian military does not have the spare capacity to keep Bashar al-Assad in power. And they don't know what to do. They don't have the planes. They don't have the missiles. They don't have the bombs. They don't have the intelligence or the special forces to stop the advance of these rebels. And Syria is very important for the Russians. They use this naval base and this air base to project power into the Middle East, to project power into the Mediterranean and to Africa. If the rebels, and they're still moving, if they can capture Damascus and then turn their sights on this Russian naval base in Airfield, the Russians lost Syria. And if they lost Syria, are they going to ask Iran for permission to open a naval base and an airfield on Iranian territory? This is going to be a huge blow to the Russian operations in the Middle East and in Africa. It's spectacular, guys. So let's get Ukraine's reaction. Here's the tweets from Kuleba. Here are his thoughts I want to share. The fall of Aleppo in 2016 was a grim prelude to Bucha, Mariupol, and Bakhmut in 2022. It was in Syria that the Russian pilots learned how to raze Ukrainian cities to the ground. The world's worst failure to stand up to Putin and Assad, back then, became an open invitation for Putin to invade Ukraine. This is true. Today's rebel success in Aleppo is promising. With Putin's army being decimated in Ukraine, he likely can't spare sufficient forces to save Assad. But the lessons remain. 2016 and 2022 could have been avoided if from the very beginning democracies had fought tyrants instead of just shaking the air with words. President Obama failed. Even President Trump, when he was in office, the civil war in Syria raged for 4 years and he didn't stop it either. Neither did President Biden or NATO or the Western Alliance. The civil war in Syria has been going on for 13 years or so. And this shouldn't be. The international community should have done something about Assad, and they should have stopped the Russians from propping Assad up for more than a decade. That was Syria. Now we're going to move to Georgia. Protests erupt across Georgia in defiance of the government's anti-EU stance. Georgian police stage new crackdown on pro-EU protesters. People in Georgia are protesting right now, and you might be asking why, and they had an election last month, and I don't believe this election in Georgia last month was free and fair. The Russians obviously were interfering, and they rigged the election so the pro-Russian candidates won. The people who support Russia in Georgia were literally stuffing the ballot boxes on camera. In my video I made last month covering the election, I revealed the other methods that the Russians used to rig this election in order to make sure the Georgia Dream Party, that's the pro-Russian party, got a majority in Georgia's parliament. It's now estimated, based on experts analyzing the data, the Georgian Dream Party helped itself to about 15% of the overall vote. That's how they got the majority. That's why they're now in power. But this means a majority of people in Georgia didn't vote for the Georgia Dream Party. The majority don't support the anti-EU stance that the government is taking right now. And the population of Georgia is not very big, 3.7 million people. It's a little bit bigger than the city of Chicago here in the United States. But look at these rallies, look at these protests. This is outside the government building in Tbilisi right now. And based on the size of this crowd, this looks like hundreds of thousands of people in a country of only 3.7 million. And it's not just the capital city. Here is a relatively small town of Kashuri, only 20,000 Georgians, and there's thousands of people on the streets protesting right now. I'm going to pause it and just kind of skip forward so you can see the size of the crowd. Here's another smaller city in Georgia. This is Kutaisi. Once again, hundreds, if not a couple thousand people taking to the streets, protesting against their governments. And once again, a relatively small town in Georgia. This is receiving huge engagement from the general public. There is violence. Police are trying to disperse the crowds and crack down on them. The protesters right now are just harassing the police with fireworks. I'll link the videos down below, but there are videos of Georgian police officers severely beating protesters who didn't deserve it. And I think for the protesters, they're trying to remain peaceful, but when the police use certain tactics, a mob takes on its own spirit and destruction will occur. I don't think these people want to burn down their own government building or destroy buildings, but When the police aggravate a crowd, the crowd will react. The Georgian president has refused to step down and is rallying the nation to resist Russian influence. The fight in Georgia is about to get serious as President Zorobichvili steps up as the leader of this movement. So the president of Georgia, who's outgoing, she is basically saying that the incoming government, based on last month's election, they're not legitimate. The Russians obviously interfered. The Russians right now, today, is militarily occupying about 20% of Georgia's territory. Her statement to her people, "I am immensely proud of you, and Georgia is proud of you. A national consensus has been achieved. No one will strip us of our independence, take us back to Russia, or rob Georgia of its European future. This consensus is strengthening, and it is our power." So yeah, I would say her life is definitely at risk at the moment, but this might be Georgia's moment in time to finally break free of Russian influence. If Russia can no longer hold on to Syria, perhaps they can no longer hold on to Georgia. They already lost the election in Moldova. We've got the election coming up in Romania next week, and please, people of Romania, do not disappoint me. But it's everywhere. The counterbalance, the antagonist, the corruption coming from everywhere is the Russians. The other top story the last 2 days, Zelensky suggests ceding land for peace, for a peace deal, if NATO protects majority of Ukraine. Zelensky suggested a ceasefire could be possible if NATO protects Ukraine's controlled territories in an interview aired on Sky News. This isn't exactly what he said, but the Ukrainian government is moving towards this position as Donald Trump is about to force Ukraine and Russia to talk to each other in official negotiations. And Zelensky is saying, we can freeze the front lines and we can stop fighting only if the remaining territory becomes a member of NATO and has NATO protection. If there's no real security guarantees, then there's no reason for Ukraine to stop fighting. The war is happening now, and without security guarantees from NATO or specifically the United States, then the war is just going to start again in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. Once Russia thinks they're ready, they're just going to go back for more. So that's the scenario that Zelensky is never going to accept. Concerning the territory, Ukraine, under no circumstances, will ever recognize their territory as officially belonging to Russia. In any negotiations, we can freeze the front lines, the Russian military can occupy this territory, but never will Ukraine ever officially recognize this territory as belonging to Russia. Here's President Zelensky clarifying what he meant. It's important to understand that we will never accept any Russian occupation of our lands. We will not admit these lands to be Russian. It's our land, our people. It's a temporarily occupied part of Ukraine. Undoubtedly, this will all return. It would be beneficial to return this with diplomatic paths to avoid casualties. I'm not sure if Putin understands this, but I hope the majority of the civilized world to understand this. When it comes to NATO, well, the best guarantee of security for us is NATO membership. Economically, the best security for us is EU membership. Zelensky is saying that perhaps in negotiations they could freeze the front lines and Russia can hold on to these territories temporarily until maybe Putin dies, and then maybe Russia can have a real democratic revolution, and then as part of the talks, they could peacefully transfer this territory back to Ukraine. It's a crazy thought, but, West Germany and East Germany did reunite peacefully. So there is a precedent in Europe of this happening, only 35 years ago or whatever. It's a plan, it's an idea to make the fighting stop today. We'll find out more over the next 2 months. But here's the question. Why isn't Moscow celebrating Trump's re-election? Many expected the Kremlin to rejoice in Trump's victory, but the reaction has been tepid at best. Perhaps the Russians recognize the irreconcilable differences in the US-Russia relationship. Donald Trump threw this tweet out of nowhere yesterday. This is something different, and this is a new tone that we've not seen from Trump the last 4 years. The idea that the BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over. We require a commitment from these countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy. They can go find another sucker. There is no chance that the BRICS will replace the US dollar in international trade, and any country that tries should wave goodbye to America. There's a lot to unpack in this tweet, the first one being, if they don't have access to US markets, then 100% tariffs do nothing, because a tariff is a sales tax on imports. Trump just gets this wrong every time. But this is new language. Trump has never said anything like this before. This is open hostility towards Russia, towards China. Why is this? And this is something that I've been thinking about, and I'm going to make the arguments. When Joe Biden and the Democrats were in power, I think there was this segment of MAGA that was convinced or persuaded by the argument it would be a good thing to return to a multipolar world. You can't trust the United States as the lone hegemon. We need another superpower to balance out the worst tendencies of America. So within MAGA, there was this element, the Jackson Hinkles and the Scott Ritters, who were arguing Russia should come back. We should allow Russia to come back in order to balance out the abuse of power by the United States. That was a good argument when, once again, MAGA was not in control of the United States government. But now that Donald Trump won a free and fair election and has a mandate to govern and is in charge of the world's largest economy and the world's most powerful military, why would you want to share power? What is the argument for helping Russia or protecting Russia when MAGA now controls the US government and the US military? So there's a serious opportunity, and I do believe with MAGA there is a persuasive argument. Finish them. Just finish the Russians off. Don't let them reconstitute their empire. Under no circumstances does this benefit MAGA now that they're the lone hegemon in the world and they get to call all the shots and make all the decisions. Why would you want to share power? We're getting there, guys. We got like 52 days to make this argument, but I think people in MAGA world are starting to come around. And I am feeling pretty optimistic. Kyiv welcomes Kellogg's nomination as special representative for Ukraine and Russia by Trump. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry said that General Keith Kellogg understands the essence of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. This is the special envoy that Trump has appointed to negotiate between Russia and Ukraine, General Kellogg. And this is kind of a Trump move, like this is how he thinks and operates. So if General Kellogg is successful and he can get some amazing peace deal and end hostilities, well then Trump's going to take all the credit and start demanding his Nobel Peace Prize. But if General Kellogg fails for any reason, then Trump's going to fire him and say it was all his fault. I genuinely believe right now Trump does not want to think about or talk about Russia and Ukraine. He's more concerned with tariffs and starting a trade war and the drug cartels, illegal immigration. There's various domestic issues he cares more about. Based on his national security picks, he cares more about Israel and Iran than Russia and Ukraine. So I know there's lots of people trying to talk to and reach Donald Trump right now. Viktor Orban just made the news because he's talking to Trump. But I guarantee you Trump's just telling him, talk to my guy. Talk to General Kellogg. He's the guy in charge of this. And General Kellogg has no interest in talking to Viktor Orban, I assure you. So the Russians are starting to get concerned. Here's a clip from Russian Media Monitor. Russian state TV discusses the Orshnik launch and General Keith Kellogg. And they are not sounding too optimistic. Here's what they got to say. Donald Trump finally made a decision about the position of a special envoy on Ukraine. It will go to 80-year-old retired General Keith Kellogg. He is an old, partially plucked hawk, to be honest. Reuters writes Kellogg and his Security Council colleague, Fred Fleitz, are the authors of Trump's so-called formula of peace. It consists of telling Putin and Zelensky to negotiate. If Putin refuses, threaten to pump Ukraine full of money. If Zelensky refuses, cut off any money whatsoever. In other words, Trump's and Kellogg's negotiation tactics amount to the American way or no way. Basically, all would go well for them, if not for Moscow's official position. Freezing the conflict does not suit us. Any negotiations will start only after Ukraine's army will withdraw from Russia's 4 new regions, DPR, LPR, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, and especially our Kursk region in Russia. This is never going to happen. Ukraine is never going to give back the north bank of the river, the city of Kherson, which had a pre-war population of 300,000. And this is how insane and unrealistic the Russians are. The Russians are demanding the city of Zaporizhia, which is 700,000 people. It's larger than my hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And they want the territorial boundary of Zaporizhia, meaning they would control up to this point and be within artillery range of Dnipro. So Dnipro, a city of almost 1 million people, would now permanently have a knife to their throat if the Russians were allowed to take Zaporizhia and get this far up the river. Ukraine's never going to agree to this. And I don't think General Kellogg would even embarrass himself by asking the Ukrainians to give up a city of 700,000 people. This isn't going to work. There aren't going to be talks. The Russians aren't going to cooperate. So we're going to find out Trump's reaction when that happens. Let's get to the bad news for Russia. Drone attack sparks massive fire at an oil depot in Russia's Rostov-on-Don region. This is the Atlas oil depot, and it's been struck before. There's a video, I'll link all these down below, but the oil depot fire has been going for over 2 days now. Oil depot fires are kind of hard to put out. Ukraine destroys a North Korean Bullseye 4 missile system in the Kharkiv region. North Korea has been sending some of their equipment, and Ukraine successfully destroyed one. They released the video. If you want to see it go boom, I'll link it down below. Ukraine destroys Russian Zoopark radar complex worth about $24 million. This high-tech Zoopark radar complex was destroyed with 4 relatively cheap FPV drones, only costing, a couple $1,000. There is a video. If you want to see it, I'll link it down below. Ukraine's main intelligence hit 3 more radars in Russia's occupied Crimea. They also targeted another air defense system, and there is a video. You can see it going boom in the distance. This was near Simferopol. It's just bad. It's just bad for Russia all around this week. Let's get to the good news for Ukraine. Japan grants Ukraine $235 million for education and entrepreneur projects. Thank you so much to the Japanese. Ukraine receives a $100 million loan for budget expenses from South Korea. Thank you so much to the people of South Korea. Okay, fundraiser recap. We started this almost 2 weeks ago, and we officially went over $1 million 2 days ago, I think. We are at $1,074,676, and 11,967 heroes chose to donate. On the Donorbox page, I can see all of your comments. I can scroll down to the bottom. Let me read a couple of these. We've got Daniel Morton, 155. Sic Semper Tyrannus. Russia must be defeated. Alan, a $10 donation. Slava Ukraini, fight for democracy. We've got Monique, 148. Thank you so much. Marin, 114. Here is Gordon Gecko, 50 pounds. From Scotland, thank you to all the brave Ukrainians fighting to preserve freedom for us all. Stay strong. Keep up the good work, Jake. Dumb Ruski orcs. Your enemies are living it up off your backs in their palaces and yachts. I agree. Now, I do have some bad news. The guys at the NAFO 69 Sniffing Brigade sent me this picture. We lost a truck. This was a birthday bro truck, and you can see from the bottled water and packaged goods, it was doing a supply run. It was struck with an FPV drone, and I think the car has been totaled. Now, the crew did survive. They'll be okay, but the vehicle is gone. And I think we are going to keep this fundraiser going or open for another couple days, maybe another week or so. Any extra money we raise, we will use towards buying additional trucks and hopefully replacing some of our losses. It's up to you if you want to donate. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Final feel-good video is from friend of the channel, Richard Woodruff. He's in charge of Frontline Kits, which does various activities based out of Lviv. And he's partnered with a group called VidNova, which organizes rehabilitation retreats for Ukrainian defenders in the hospital. They get to go up to the Carpathian Mountains and do various exercises in nature to help with their rehabilitation. This is the Ukrainian team of VidNova, and this is their thank you video for our channel. I mentioned this fundraiser about a month or so ago, and we helped raise the funds to send these female Ukrainian defenders to the mountains, and the team at VidNova wants to thank you guys.
We want to thank you, Jake, from the bottom of our hearts for creating this huge things for us and for our defenders. That support from your community is really important for us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, world community, to support our project and to make it real.
And to support our defenders and to support our fighting for freedom all together. Thank you and дуже дякуємо, JakeBro.
Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава!
Yeah! You meant to run off me, guys! See, we can do this, just one take.
Richard made a video about the retreats. It's on his channel, about 12 and a half minutes. I'll link this down below if you want to see the whole thing. Thank you so much to everyone who continues to donate and to support Ukraine. A lot's going to happen in the next couple months, and there might be some serious moves. I didn't predict potentially Bashar al-Assad falling this month, and when dictators fall, it often happens abruptly. That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.